Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Paul Gasparini, the principal of Jamesville DeWitt High School in upstate New York. I am also the secondary school principal representative on the National Assessment Governing Board. The National Assessment Governing Board sets policy for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, also known as NAEP, or the nation's report card. NAEP scores tell us what our students know and can do in subjects like reading and mathematics. But today we're not here just to talk about NAEP scores. We're talking about NAEP scores and the 2019 NAEP High School Transcript Study. The NAEP High School Transcript Study collects data on high school graduates' course taking and performance from across the nation. It provides invaluable information on what high school courses graduates have taken, their GPAs, and how this all fits with NAEP scores. I've got plenty of questions from my experience as a high school principal. I wonder whether my students are now earning more or fewer credits than previous generations of students, and if students are now earning higher GPAs. For principals, the question is whether my school's experience matches the national experience. We have lots of questions. Luckily, NAEP has lots of answers. Understanding all the data and how it changes over time gives us important insights about educational access, rigor, and achievement, as well as college and career preparation. Before we begin, a few notes. This event is being recorded and live streamed. If you have questions about the study findings, please tweet us with the hashtag NAEP. Follow today's discussion at GovBoard. Now, I've got my perspective as principal, but what about students' perspectives? We asked some students from across the country to share their high school experiences with us.
I'm hoping to be a political science and government major.
I was interested in pursuing journalism in college.
I would like to major in marine biology.
I want to pursue being a therapist.
And I plan to study speech pathology.
I'm taking an AP Micro and AP Macroeconomic course, and I have the opportunity to take the AP Government and Politics course as well.
Journalism, English, and debate have helped me the most with pursuing my career in marine biology.
My English classes, we do learn how to write better, so those classes definitely do help me with the writing skills, because journalism is about writing. It's also about interviewing, so my speaking skills as well. Definitely a computer class after my sophomore year. That would be the missing piece. Last year I took arts and music, but since Banneker is strictly academic, we don't really have a lot of choices for art classes or like music classes.
There are no languages offered here at Kalichi. If you want to take another language, you have to take it online. I met with an advisor from the University of Wyoming this summer, and they went through courses that I could take online as college classes that would transfer over to the University of Wyoming.
I have had conversations with my counselor, and I've said, and I've asked questions about kind of how I can fit a certain elective like sketch comedy in my schedule in order to continue being successful.
I would say that the upperclassmen were helpful in providing information and resources on which course selections to take.
Learning how to communicate over the computer and not being in person was definitely a learning curve for me. And the internet out here is not always the best. It's really difficult to tackle sometimes because some days it's great and some days it doesn't work at all.
I think everybody's mental health got worse in the beginning of COVID. I was doing a lot of research on mental health, and I found it very interesting and what the mind does when you're alone and how the mind reacts and a lot of stuff like that. So it was really interesting to learn about, and that's kind of when I knew I was like, oh, I really want to do this in life.
Take your time and look at what you really want to do with your life. And of course that might change, but you can start looking at it now, and by figuring it out what you kind of want to do, you can have an idea of the classes you want to take.
That is really terrific information. Fantastic. Those experiences seem to me to be typical. But the question, of course, is, are they typical? I don't know, but NAEP has the answers. To help us answer all of these questions is Aaliyah Wong and Dr. Peggy Carr. Aaliyah will moderate our discussion today. She's an award-winning education reporter for USA Today. And Dr. Carr will give us answers to those questions. Dr. Carr is the commissioner for the National Center for Educational Statistics. Thank you both for leading us through this.
Thank you. So these students' experiences gave us a glimpse into how young people are navigating their high school course choices. I'm curious to see how those experiences align with the study's findings. So Dr. Carr, can you tell us about the high school transcript study?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Aaliyah. You know, I want to first say that that was a great video, and it complements what I will be sharing now in the data presentation portion of this program. This study contains a wealth of data to help us understand what's happening among the nation's high school students over the past few decades. About every 10 years, this study has examined the course-taking patterns of American high school graduates, including how many high school credits they're earning, what proportion of students are completing a rigorous curriculum, and what kinds of grades they're earning. We're also going to examine the relationship between course taking and students' achievement as measured by NAEP to give us an even better sense of what the achievement picture looks like for our high school graduates and how it has changed over time. The NAEP High School Transcript Study began in 1990 and focuses on a sample of high school graduates that participated in the NAEP assessments. These data are pre-COVID and are from the 2018-2019 school year. The results are based on a sample of about 47,000 graduates and their transcripts. These transcripts were collected from about 1,400 public and private schools across the country. Finally, for simplicity, this presentation will only compare 2019 to prior studies in roughly 10-year increments, starting with 1990. We will begin by looking at the big picture for some high school level takeaways, some high-level takeaways from the 2019 report. So overall, the study shows a variety of positive developments in high school course-taking measures when compared to 2019 to previous years. The average number of Carnegie credits earned by high school graduates increased, as did graduates' high school GPAs and the percentage of students earning a mid-level curriculum, which is a measure of course rigor. These three indicators are at the highest level ever reported in this study. However, the performance of the 2019 high school graduates on the NAEP 12th grade mathematics assessment is lower when compared to 2009, while the science scores of these same graduates did not change over this time period. Now we're going to look at the results in greater detail. We're going to begin with information on credits earned. This is an important measure because it indicates how many courses a high school graduate took, overall and by subject. All credits from the transcripts were converted to Carnegie units or credits, and the credits are equivalent to a year-long course. The study classifies courses into 3 areas based on content: academic courses, career and technical, education courses, and other courses. Academic courses are the main classes high school students take, such as English, mathematics, science, social studies, visual and performing arts, and world languages. Career and technical education courses include vocational subjects such as information technology, human services, communication, audiovisual technology, business and marketing, and human services. Other courses include health and physical education, religious education, military science, and miscellaneous courses. Before I explain this particular slide, let me mention that anytime you see an asterisk, it means that the number is statistically significantly different from the 2019 results. So in 2019, the stacked bars on the far right, you see that high school graduates, again, on average, earned a little over 28 Carnegie credits. Again, the highest in the history of the study. This overall increase is mirrored by increases in academic courses, the lightest blue at the bottom of the bar, and other courses, the darker blue at the top of the bar. The average credits earned in career and technical courses, the medium blue shown here, in 2019 was smaller when compared to 1990, and 2000 as well, but not different from 2009. To better understand course-taking rigor, the study developed 3 distinct curriculum levels. These levels can help us measure how well graduates are prepared for post-secondary education based on the number and type of academic courses taken. We defined 3 curriculum levels for this study. The standard level includes 4 credits in English and 3 each in the 3 remaining core academic subjects. The mid-level curriculum includes all of the standard credits, plus more challenging requirements for mathematics and science, along with a world language requirement. Finally, the rigorous level shown here includes all of the mid-level requirements, plus additional requirements for mathematics, science, and world languages. Any curriculum that did not meet the requirements for the standard level is considered below standard. When looking at curriculum levels obtained over the decade, 2019 on top and 1990 on the bottom, you notice quite a shift. The bottom standard curriculum is in dark blue to the far left, standard curriculum in the medium blue, and mid-level curriculum in the lightest blue, and the rigorous in the beige. And again, the asterisk indicates a statistically significant difference from 2019. What you quickly notice is that over the years, graduates have been completing more challenging curricula. From 1990 to 2019, the percentage of graduates completing a below standard curriculum decreased from 59% to 16%. That's good. The percentage of graduates completing a standard curriculum rose from 11% in 1990 to 21% in 2019. And there was an increase in graduates completing a mid-level curriculum from 26% in 1990 to 51% in 2019. So whereas in 1990, most graduates had a below standard curriculum, and in 2019, most graduates had obtained a mid-level curriculum. Finally, there was an 8-point increase for graduates completing a rigorous curriculum from 4% in 1990 to 12% in 2019. So now let's take a look at grade point average, or GPA, which indicates how well a high school graduate performed in their overall coursework within a selected subject. Schools across the United States use a variety of grading systems, so the letter and numeric grades reported on the transcripts, well, they need to be standardized so that they can be compared. The study standardizes all GPAs to a 4.0 scale, or what many of us might refer to as an unweighted GPA. The 2019 data indicated that graduates' GPAs had changed over time. From 1990 to 2019, overall GPA increased from 2.68 to 3.11. The 2019 GPA was a B average and was the highest average GPA ever reported for the study. GPA by course type tells a similar story of increasing GPAs over time, as you can see here. Compared to every previous year, regardless of the course type, GPAs have risen. That's indicated again here by our asterisk. GPA in the academic courses was 2.98 in 2019 compared to 2.86 in 2009, with the highest GPA in classes coded under Other, which include physical education, ROCT, and other miscellaneous courses. GPA by race ethnicity also shows a similar pattern of improvement over time. Compared to 1990, 2000, and 2009, the 2019 GPA is higher in all 4 racial ethnic groups reported here. Asian Pacific Islanders graduates earn an average overall GPA of 3.39 in 2019, the highest of all of the reported student racial ethnic groups. Not shown here and worth noting is that the gaps in average overall GPA between white and high school graduates and graduates in other reported student racial ethnic groups did not change significantly in 2019 compared to 2009. Compared to 1990, however, both the white black and the white Hispanic gaps have increased due to faster improvement by white students. So now, in this last section, we will explore the relationship between course taking and what students know and can do as measured by NAEP mathematics. Overall, 2019 high school graduates had an average score of 151 on the NAEP mathematics assessment, which is lower than the average for high school graduates in 2009, which was 156. Although there was a slightly different student population, I think it's important to note that in grade 12 NAEP, which includes all 12th graders, they, not just those who are graduated, which is represented in this study, we also observed a score decline comparing 2009 to 2019. Mirroring the overall score decline, the average NAEP score for graduates completing both the mid-level and rigorous curriculum levels scored lower in 2019 compared to 2009. Students completing the standard and below standard curriculum held steady. I do want to point out, though, that graduates obtaining a rigorous curriculum scored higher than their counterparts completing less rigorous curriculum and have scores on the NAEP scale in the proficient range. Graduates who completed a standard or below standard curriculum were at or just under the NAEP basic achievement level. And while we do not have the same data for the NAEP science data, we didn't share them here today because there were really no changes overall by the curricula rigor. So that completes my overall results from the 2019 NAEP High School Transcript Study. There is much more information in the full report, which you can find at NAEP website, nationsreportcard.gov. But in closing, I would like to thank the students and the schools who participated in this assessment. With all gratitude, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you to those students, and thank you, Dr. Carr, for sharing that data. Before we delve in, I wanted to start with a high-level question. This data is obviously from 2019. That was a very different time. It feels like a century ago. That doesn't mean that this data is irrelevant, of course, quite the opposite. So could you share, how should we be thinking about these findings against the backdrop of everything that's transpired over the last 2 years?
Well, thank you for your question. We have some slides to help us talk through that particular question, and we can show them here. We're going to dig into the data.
Yeah, so why are credits going up?
Well, it's a good question because it does look pretty good, huh? In this slide that we have here, you see that we've been tracking the industry, not just NAEP. It's been tracking the credits across the states. What we have here, data not actually found in the survey, but come from a very reliable source, actually two reliable sources, the Council of Chief State School Officers and the Commission, Education Commission of the States for the 2019 data, to be precise. Let's orient you to these slides first. What you'll see here is in the dark are 4 credits or more. This is the proportion of states that now require 4 credits or more to graduate. In the next shade of blue, 2.5 credits, 2.5 to 3.5 credits to graduate. In the lighter blue, 2 credits or less to graduate. And then some states reported no state graduation requirements. But I should point out that's because many states leave it up to the districts to decide, which is okay. But what you see here in this slide is that there's been a big shift in requirements by states, according to our standard data sources here, in the requirements of rigor in order to graduate. Let's focus on mathematics here, for example. So for this highest level, you'll see that it was 0 in 1987, and now it's 13, 4 credits or more to graduate from school. What about the second level here, the next shade of blue, 2.5 to 3.5 credits? Boy, has that gone up. Boy, has that changed from 12 to 30. Actually, that one is 0 to 30 because the shades are so close in color. That one's 0 to 30. The next one is from 31 down to 2. But that is good. We actually want fewer students graduating with, less rigorous courses. So this is a good news story. And by the way, did I mention that graduation rates are up? No. And they are up for the students who typically would not be scoring as well. They're in school, and that's good. That's particularly true for Hispanics and Blacks, and particularly for Hispanics. So this is a good news story in this context. Okay.
I have a question. Curriculum rigor is rising. GPAs are up, yet NAEP mathematics scores are down. Do we have an explanation for that?
Oh, coming from a principal.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
That's a hard question. Thank you, Paul. Well, let me first start out by saying that we're seeing some patterns that are not just indicative of the study that we're examining today. We've seen it in NAEP, we've seen it in the ACT, we've also seen it in our international studies. Scores are going down. And what we've also seen, although this is not apples to apples comparison, is very insightful, what we've seen is that the bottom of the distribution is dropping faster. So those students in the 10th and 25th percentile, students are struggling the most, are dropping. But when you look across the entire distribution for any of these measures, what you're also finding is that that's not true of the top. Students at the top are sort of holding steady, and in some cases actually improving. So there's an interesting story here to be told. And in this chart that we have here, we can tell that story with course taking. So let's unpack this a little bit. What you see here, I call this my step chart, is the relationship between the scores on the NAEP assessment. We're going to focus on math, and the highest course reported to us that the student took while in high school. And what you'll see here, these arrows, of course, indicate scores going down. And what you see here is that there's first a positive relationship between scores and the more rigorous courses. That's a correlation, is a pretty tight, decent correlation. But what do you see is that bifurcation that I just described a few minutes ago when you focus on the NAEP basic range. You see that 165 for students that reported their highest course being pre-calculus, statistics, and trigonometry. Those students are declining in comparison to 2009. So it's telling an interesting story. What I think might be helpful is for us to unpack one of these steps so that we can take a better look at what might be happening. So again, for students who reported the highest level of course taking to be pre-calculus, statistics, and trigonometry, just that one step that we were looking at before, boy, have we seen a change in or shift in the proportion of students from various racial ethnic groups moving into those courses. Now, given what I just said about graduation rates up, dropout rates down, that's not a bad story. That's a pretty good story. Even though the scores are going down, I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But let's unpack this a little bit. What you see here is for white students, there are less white students in these courses. And the story there is that they're taking other courses as their highest. And that is true for Asians too. They're less. You see they're 6.2 down to 4.9, but that's, again, indication that they're taking as their highest course more rigorous courses. But those students that have increased and improved graduation rates, well, look what's happening to them. That is an interesting pattern, and one most notable for Hispanics that have moved from 12.7 in 2009 to 26.7 in 2019. So more of these students are reporting this is their highest level than ever before. Again, a good news story. Now, this is complicated. There's a lot of nuance here, so I want to unpack it one more time for you. Let's look at the actual scores, that bifurcation that I described earlier. One of the things that you see here is that there are racial differences, as I indicated before, racial ethnic differences in how well students score on this assessment, with white students and Asian students scoring higher than their counterparts. And Hispanic students and Black students, most notably here, are scoring lower than their counterparts. So you might ask, how does that extrapolate into these findings that we're seeing? In this next slide, yes, unpacking it a little more, there are two things I want to point out to you. First of all, everybody's going down. White students are going down. This is for this level, this step that we're unpacking. Blacks are going down, Hispanics, Asians, everybody's going down. So there's a story here. One might say, well, does it have anything to do with more Hispanics? Well, we asked ourselves that question too, and the answer is no. Because when you control for Hispanics, they went from 13 to 27%. It only accounts for about 3 points of that decline. So there would have been 6 points or so decline anyway. So we have an interesting conundrum here that we still don't quite have all of the answers to.
So how have curriculum levels changed among different racial and ethnic groups?
Well, okay, let's orient ourselves to this slide. I may have shown it in my actual talk as well, but it'd be good to review it. So recall that there are 3 levels that we use to assess the rigor of the courses that students were taking during their high school tenure: standard, mid-level, and rigorous. The rigorous one is in the beige to the far right. And if they don't reach either one of those, none of those, they are in the below. That is that dark blue. Look how it's changed over time. If you focused on the darker blue, you can see there was a lot of it in 1990, and it's so much less, going from 59% to 16%. Now, is that not good news? That is good news. Even when you look at the rigorous, which is on the far right, of students completing rigorous courses, it went from 4% in 1990 to 12% in 2019. Now, your question was about race, ethnicity, and in this slide, now that you know how to read the slide, just extrapolate that color, if you can't see all of the details, to what you see here. You see whites on the far upper left, Asians on the upper right, Hispanics on the bottom left, and blacks on the bottom right. And if you just look at the colors that we just talked about before and compare them, you'll see that everybody is improving. And again, as I've indicated before, this is sort of good. This is a good news story. And the patterns are comparable. The one exception might be for black students, where you see the trend at the far right for the rigorous isn't as strong as the other groups here. I would like to see that stronger. It's going from 2% to 5 to 6 to 5. And because my asterisk isn't there, it means that it's not significantly, those other ones are not significantly growing like I would like for them to do, or we would like for them to do. And here's another slide that bifurcates them in a way that you can see them more quickly. Just focus on the gold. For white students, they've gone, this is at least mid-level, which is pretty rigorous, from 60% to 64, that's good. For Asians, it didn't change, but they were already high at 70 and 68%. For Hispanics, this is really a good news story, from 57% to 62%. And black students have not changed appreciably, and not significantly so. So I think I'll stop there.
It looks like students who complete a rigorous curriculum do better on NAEP and have higher GPAs. So who are these students?
Well, you know, one way to think about understanding who these students are in these more rigorous courses is to look at the slide as I have here. At the top, we have the percentage of students and their racial ethnic composition in the population, okay? So one way to think about this is that if whites are 51% of the population, you would expect them to be around that in these more rigorous courses, which is that bottom row shown here. So this is how we're going to unpack this. For white students, you see that they are overrepresented among the rigorous, from 55, that's my asterisk there, to 51. So that means they're overrepresented. They're doing good. They're overrepresented. Blacks, however, are underrepresented. They represent about 13% of the population, and we certainly would like to see more of them proportionally in this area, from 6 compared to 13. Hispanics, the discrepancy isn't quite as large, but it's still there, and it's significant, 22 compared to 26. Asians are overrepresented. They do well in these studies, 14 compared to 6% of the population. I can unpack it more for you in this next slide very quickly to orient you to the colors. You have the northeast on the far left and the west on the far right. And if you compare the asterisks very quickly, you'll see that Northwest is overrepresented among the more rigorous course-taking curriculum. And the South is under and the West is under. And finally, what if we took a look at these same results for locale? That's whether schools are located in the city or the suburbs or the town or the rural. And the one comparison I want to focus your eye on most notably is for the rural. That is another area that we often, are concerned about their access to courses, particularly the more rigorous courses. And what you can see is they're underrepresented, 11 compared to 19. Cities are overrepresented and suburbs are overrepresented. So these are some interesting ways to unpack these data. And I can tell you there's a lot more in the report that we could share.
Yeah, so is there a specific course or specific courses that keep graduates from moving up to that most rigorous curriculum level?
Yes, and we unpacked this one as well, so thank you for your question. But let's orient ourselves once again. This is the most rigorous one. You can see for rigorous, you need 4 courses or credits. In English principal, you know this very well. 3 in social studies, 4 in mathematics, 3 in science, and 3 in world languages. But feast your eyes on what those math and science credits have to include. They have to include higher courses, including the pre-calculus. For science, it must include biology, chemistry, and physics. So pretty rigorous, wouldn't you say? And this is based on some research we did years ago that this would be considered a very rigorous course. Now, to get to your question precisely, let's look at this slide here. Again, orienting yourselves to the colors, you'll see 2019, and notice that the highest bar there is world language. So in 2019, the course that was sort of keeping people from being classified as having taken a rigorous curriculum was world language. 71% of the students who did not achieve that, it's because they did not have a world language. And it's interesting, Leah, in that video that we saw earlier, one of the students said that she had to go, I think she said online or to a post-secondary institution in her community to get this course. And I also believe she was in a rural area.
She was from Wyoming.
Yeah. So there you have it.
She also spoke about her internet issues.
Yes, that's right. Another problem.
I have a question. This study also collects information on students' career and technical education courses. Are there any interesting findings in that regard?
CTE.
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody doesn't go directly into college, do they? There's a lot of options in the world of work, and preparing students in the area of career and technical course taking is an important role for high schools, wouldn't you say? Mm-hmm. Yes. So in this next slide here, the first one I want to show is to give you just an overall picture that 85% of the students who responded to this from the transcripts were taking at least 1 credit in career and technical courses. And we've ordered them here so that you can see from the highest to the lowest what that looks like. Information technology at 29%, and they can pick more than one, right, Paul? Human services, 28%, business and marketing, 21%, so forth and so on. So this is interesting as the overall pattern. But let's unpack that a little bit and see what we have here as a change, an increase in comparison to 2009. And you can see an increase in human services, an increase in engineering and technology, health, care sciences, so forth and so on, as indicated by these upward arrows. In the next slide here, you'll see the declines. And I think this one is interesting. You mentioned our colleague earlier on the board and his focus on career and technical education. And what you see is a decline for information technology. I thought that was interesting. And you also see a decline for business and marketing and a decline for agriculture and construction. We did take a stronger, a deeper look into the information technology. There is a reasonable explanation for what might be going on there. Students are not taking intro to computers or computer literacy, for example, and perhaps you might know that in your cohort. Everybody already knows these things, and so there's no need to take those courses. Or perhaps, Paul, they're integrated into other courses that are available to students. But this is a fun study. It is chocked with a lot of rich information. It is one of our favorites, Paul. We talk about it all the time, the high school transcript study.
Yeah, so many fascinating nuggets in there. And I want to bring us back full circle, talk about these findings within the context of the pandemic. Again, this data is from 2019, very different time. There have been so many disruptions since then. We hear constantly about students saying they're not able to take rigorous courses just because, of staffing issues, or they're not available, or they're remote. So how should we think about these findings within the context of the pandemic? And how do you think course-taking patterns and grade patterns have changed in the past 2 years? And I pose this question to both of you. As Paul, you're obviously in the trenches as well and might have thoughts on these questions. So.
It was interesting to me, and the information that Dr. Carr pointed out was particularly curious to me. As we talked before the session started, I referenced our fellow board member, Reginald McGregor. And Reginald represents the general public in business. And I know he's very interested in how students are being prepared to face the world of work. And it was fascinating that business and marketing, as Dr. Carr indicated, and manufacturing both saw a decline of students prepared. I think that this is the result overall of both federal and state policies over the past 20, 25 years, which have put a heavier emphasis on preparing students for bachelor's degrees and even master's degrees. I know that there's some reconsideration of that now to have a broader career technical preparation at the high school level. And it will be, I think this information is very helpful in helping policymakers and curriculum developers in rethinking their approach to the programs we offer at the secondary level.
Paul, you make a really good point, and we did dig into the main NAEP data just a little bit, and there's some empirical data to support what you're saying. We asked students about their college aspirations. It's a question not directly asked in the same way in 2019 compared to 2013, but we saw an uptick in students saying, I'm going to four-year college, from 55% in 2013 to 61% in 2019. That supports that hypothesis. Even for 2 years, there's been a significant increase for the NAEP 12th grade population from 26% to 33%. Students are, for whatever reason, are expecting to go to college, whether it's 4 or 2 year. Now, there are other studies that we have at NCES that can perhaps unpack these. We have a high school longitudinal study that we follow students from high school into the world of work, so we can actually see what they really are doing, not just what they say they're going to do. So there's more data that we can use to answer this question.
And as a reminder to everyone tuning in, we're also taking questions from the audience via Twitter. Please post them on Twitter using the hashtag NAEP. That's hashtag NAEP for NAEP. Paul, do you have any questions you want to pose to Dr. Carr while we wait for questions to come in?
Well, the one question I think that often comes up, and certainly is of interest from a board member, is the apparent disconnect between high achievement in AP courses, rigorous courses, and the fact that it appears as though students did not perform, and now I know this is a national sample, but didn't perform at the NAEP advanced level. And I'm wondering if we could unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
Thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question, Paul, and particularly when you look at the science assessment, and we didn't talk as much about that as today. But I think it's important to contextualize these assessments as well as the achievement levels, basic, proficient, and advanced, for what they are. They're aspirational. There is what students know and can do, and then there is what students should know and be able to do. And the board has been very clear about that. Aspirational goals for these content areas are reflected both in the framework and the assessments themselves and in the achievement levels. So it is very possible that the highest, the solid mastery of academic knowledge is, the one at the top, or the superior one. Students aren't reaching them because it is still a very aspirational goal. So it's something we need to watch. I think that all of the assessments have this pattern where the student's ability don't always match the aspirations in the assessment. But is that a bad thing, I think, is to ask ourselves? Because we want space to grow. And so if there is this direct link between the assessments and what they measure, what they purport to measure, and what they want students to know, then there's no room for growth. It's the balance that I think is important.
We're often reminded, and I remember these conversations around the board table, that the frameworks we develop, and we're just finished the English framework, we're developing the science framework, and we have these philosophical conversations. And those of us who are practitioners are often reminded by the psychometricians and others on the board that the frameworks we're developing are assessment frameworks, not content frameworks.
Right.
And there is a difference. For advanced placement exams, those are content frameworks. For the NAEP, it's largely, as Dr. Carr indicated, aspirational, and they're assessed differently too.
And I don't think we're apologizing for that. I think that it's okay to have aspirational goals, but it's that balance that I think we often struggle with.
Indeed.
Do you have any information, well, you're talking about this, but any more information on course content?
Oh, yes, course content. Well, I was surprised that it didn't come up earlier in that second question that you asked me. I didn't say much about it, but I figured it would come up. So one might ask themselves, well, there's a good news story that everybody is taking more rigorous courses. That's the good news. But the scores are declining in the bottom of the distribution. What's up with that, one might ask? Well, this is not new. This is a pattern that we've been seeing for the transcript study and the NAEP data for a while now, this disconnect between student course taking and how they're actually performing. So in 2005 or so, we conducted what is now a really, really popular report on what is actually in those courses. The last time, that was in 2005 when we actually did the transcript study at that time. And we looked at the books that were used in the classes. We looked at their syllabus. We looked at the questions in the text books that were being used to administer the courses, the instruction. And what we found was that they did not always match what was in the course catalog or the title itself. There was this mixed match. So Title I, the title of a particular course is not always indicative of what is actually being taught in the course, is what was surmised. And you know, I have to be really frank about it. The students who were more likely to be in that unfortunate situation were students of color, particularly Hispanic students. So this is something I think we're going to need to watch as an education statistical community, those with boots on the ground in particular, Paul, what is actually happening, who's teaching these courses. As more students come into these classes, it's good that they're not dropping out. It's good that the graduation rates are higher, and more students are taking these courses, but we've got to pay attention to the quality of these courses. Now, that was a 2005 study. That's pretty old. So by the time we get to 2024, you asked about COVID, we're going to take another look. The goal is to take another look at the content of the courses and see what we see there. Also, that 2024 cohort would be an interesting cohort, relevant to your question about COVID before, because they would have been freshmen in 2020, right? When schools start closing down. So what do? Do they go online? What kind of courses were they taking? What kind of instruction did they have? Boy, is this transcript study in 2024 going to be interesting.
Very interesting. And one of the things that NAEP has talked about is helping NAEP have utility and relevance. I can't think of, as a high school principal, I can't think of any other national high school transcript study. Any college admission counselor can tell you when they bring in transcripts from a wide variety, especially national schools like Boston University, among others, that look at transcripts literally from all over the country, and I'll just stay in the United States right now, they find very different reporting systems.
Yes.
And we even find that locally when we have a student who transfers into our school, a school counselor will look at his or her transcript and ask, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? To the extent,
interesting, yeah.
To the extent that our NAEP study can help
unpack that,
have policymakers think about that, I think it would provide a great utility and great relevance to secondary institutions.
Yes, absolutely.
With the 2024 study, will there be any special questionnaires or any unique components that get directly at those sort of time-sensitive questions about the pandemic?
Yeah, well, you know, hopefully it will be post-pandemic in 2024. We don't know, right?
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. But there is a questionnaire that we always administer to the students, and there's a school questionnaire. And there's actually a special questionnaire for schools when we do the transcript study. And so we've actually already started thinking about a COVID component to those questionnaires. We have COVID modules for the assessments that we are administering now. But the questions, hopefully, if we're in post-pandemic, will be a little different, particularly with this 2020 cohort that's going to be graduating in 2024. So, yes, we will have a strong context to look at those scores.
Great. Another question from Twitter, and it sounds like this is a technical question, so just to caveat, what is your reasoning for looking at unweighted GPA as opposed to, or in addition to weighted GPA?
Well, standardization. We can't compare apples to oranges.
Sure.
So we have to standardize. You know, you have some grades that can be 5.0.
Yeah.
Right? So we want to standardize these comparisons so that we're comparing apples to apples.
Many colleges do the same thing, by the way. When they take in transcripts, they recalculate them based upon their own measure or metric.
That's a good point.
Largely for what I was just talking about. There's disparate ways, as Dr. Carr said, of ways of reporting grades, et cetera. So I think the way actually that NCES does it is a really sound way to approach that very difficult technical topic, as you pointed out, Aaliyah.
What does this study tell us about trends we're seeing in post-secondary education, speaking of which?
Well, preparedness is an interesting thing. We as a program, and actually I would say a lot more of this work has been done on the NAEP side, and looking into preparedness for post-secondary and mostly post-secondary academic. And what we have found is that these assessments, the math assessment and the reading assessment at 12th grade, correlate pretty highly with what students actually are able to do when they get to college. So if we say that they're proficient or, they're in the basic range and approaching proficient, they get into college and they do okay. There are sometimes some remedial courses that they have to take. But this is a question we've been trying to unpack for a while. I think that we've done better as a program in looking at the relationships and the predictability of these assessments and the levels and outcomes for the world of post-secondary academic pursuits, but not as much for the world of work. So Reginald would not be as happy.
I agree
Our
with
colleague
that.
Reginald wouldn't be as happy.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
One question this is just from me. We see that these racial gaps in GPA, they're quite persistent and in some cases have worsened. Why do you think that is, and how do you see that? Do you see that trend just continuing the coming years?
Well, I hope not.
Yeah.
And I want to tell a story out of the data that will help us understand that there's resiliency in these data. Remember that step I unpacked for students who were taking highest course pre-calculus statistics? The step right above that was calculus. And what you found in that step is that the scores had not gone down, they had leveled off, which is a good news story. But when you dive into that data deeper, guess what? The only racial ethnic group that showed a significant increase were blacks. Okay? If black students who, and I happen to remember the number, in 1990, we have work going on here in the studio here. In 1990, blacks were scoring 165 if they took that calculus course. But in 2019, they were scoring 177, which is barely, but in the proficient range. That's good news. So what that means is if these students are exposed to more rigorous courses, even if there's a tradition, some patterns that they usually score lower, doesn't mean that that is going to be the case. So there is a resiliency, and I'm pushing for an analysis of our data around equity and what the data can tell us about equity and resiliency. And that's one good example I'm happy to share.
We are going through a construction project at our school, so we're quite familiar with this, the background noise. We can operate through that. One of the things that we didn't talk much about was SES, and I'd like to see outside of the racial categories, even inside of racial categories, what the difference is in GPA and SES.
Yeah.
There are those who say that GPAs rising are a result of great inflation or a negative trend, and I want to talk about them a little bit differently. I see those as a positive development. First of all, what it says is more students can succeed at higher levels, which has always been a reluctance. Part of the policies that were NCLB and others were trying to address that. The whole, I think there was a phrase, the soft bigotry of low expectations. So it was trying to say, look, people can achieve at higher levels, and this shows it. I think when you get into some, again, going to the SES, and Dr. Carr pointed out the results in suburban schools that are typically probably better resourced than some of our rural and urban schools. You have better teacher prep, better pedagogy over the past decade, 2-3 decades. There's more supports for students, and I think those translate into higher GPAs. And what we want to see is those that better teacher prep, that better pedagogy, the better supports across all of our schools, regardless of where the school is located and regardless of SES status. And so I see it as a story about SES as well.
Yeah, one of my questions was going to be how much of a problem do you think grade inflation is? And it sounds like it's a complicated story.
It is.
I think that's true.
Right.
I think that's true.
Because that's been the headline for years now, right? Grade inflation is a thing.
Yeah,
I remember, I've covered it for years. And I know there's some research that suggests grade inflation is more pronounced at higher SES schools. I don't know if that's that data. If there's more recent research on that. But do you have any thoughts on sort of the notion of grade inflation and how we should think about that, whether it's a problem?
Well, I wish I had that data at my fingertips, but that data I don't have. It's a good question, the relationship between SES and what these data are looking like on the grade GPA. But something Paul said did make me remember to say something about these GPAs. We were concerned that the GPAs overall were being inflated by PE or arts or something like that, or ROCT. And there's nothing wrong with those courses. I don't mean to imply that, but we thought that the overall GPA was being inflated by, students taking more of those courses. Not so. Those GPAs were going up just like the rigorous ones were going up. And every which way we tried to unpack it, but we had no evidence to suggest that is the case. So regardless of what you think about the value of GPAs when people receive these GPAs, wherever they are, it seems to be systematically occurring regardless of the types of courses. But the SES is a good one. I have to go back and see if we can unpack that.
Well, that was all the questions from our audience. Paul, do you have any final questions you're dying to ask Dr. Carr while you have her?
Well, we talk a lot about, I think we've covered the range. It's very interesting for us to go back in. I think the governing board has some really good questions and sort of direction as we head into the 2024 study.
Right.
And you just referenced contextual questions, which the governing board has a policy responsibility to oversee and direct. Right. And I believe we're going to have some good ones, and this conversation certainly was helpful to that.
Yes,
So.
very rich.
Well, thank you so much, Paul and Dr. Carr, for such a wonderful discussion. You've given us so much to think about, and thanks to all of you for submitting your questions and joining us. A recording of the event will be posted soon on nagb.gov. That's nagb.gov. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
Thank you, Aaliyah.